Our world is dictated by systems far more complex than any one of us can see. A financial market, for example, is not just numbers on a screen, it is billions of individual decisions. Buyers and sellers interacting with one another in ways that are anything but linear. A tiny policy change in one corner of the world can trigger a chain reaction across industries, economies, and entire continents. Climate, supply chains, social networks, the complex systems that shape our lives all share the same structure. They are dynamic environments built from countless interacting components. And because these interactions compound and progress, these systems don't just simply change, they evolve. And to understand how we should think about building intelligent machines in the modern world, we must start here. With the very nature of the environments we expect our models to navigate. So what do I mean by this word over here, emergence? Well, emergent behavior is what happens when seemingly insignificant interactions lead to substantial outcomes. Think of a slight shift in sentiment, a tiny rise in temperature, a subtle imbalance in supply and demand. Individually, these changes are small, but in a complex system, they don't stay small. They ripple through networks of dependencies and feedback loops, ultimately giving rise to new states, often abruptly. Think of a market rally, a social contagion, or a tipping point in the climate. Critically, emergent behavior is not just more complicated behavior. It is behavior that could not have been predicted simply by looking at the individual parts of the system. The entire environment behaves in a new way. The complex systems I was talking about earlier are driven by emergent behavior. This means that they do not merely vary over time, they undergo changes in state. They reorganize, reorder, and redefine the very patterns that once governed them. And that presents a fundamental challenge for today's AI. Deep learning, the engine of modern AI, was never designed to understand emergent behavior. Deep learning models have incredible applications across a range of areas. They generate music, craft images, and translate languages. However, deep learning models still only have knowledge of the past. You may have heard of something called a neural network. This is trained on historical data. Its weights and biases freeze that knowledge into a static internal memory. Once trained, the model becomes a snapshot, a portrait of yesterday's world. This is okay in stable domains like language, where the environment doesn't change much over time. But in complex systems, yesterday's patterns do not necessarily govern tomorrow. Let's think about finance again. A group of researchers concluded that sequential deep learning models may fail during sudden shocks or regime changes. During these regime changes, components interact with one another, rules change, and new states emerge. And at the same time, a trained model continues forecasting as if nothing had ever happened. Deep learning sees correlation, not causation. It recognizes what once was, not how new states come to be. And in emergent environments, where large-scale changes can start from micro-scale interactions, that myopia matters. Our usual response to the issue in the community is retraining. Collect new data, feed it back into the model, and update the weights. But retraining is reactive by design. It's always late, because the world must change first before the model can learn about the change. It's slow, damaging to our environment, and expensive. Dario Amodei, CEO of the AI lab Anthropic, said that AI developers are likely to spend close to $1 billion on a single training run this year, and up to $10 billion training runs in the next 2 years. But perhaps even more importantly, from the moment training ends, the world continues to evolve. You're using yesterday's data to chase today's reality, always behind, always playing catch up. Retraining can slow the information decay, but it can never eliminate it. This isn't a bug, it's an inevitability. I call this the emergence condition, the moment in time when a system's new state renders past learnings obsolete. This happens constantly in the real world. A tariff announcement reshapes global trade flows. A new social narrative reshapes consumer behavior. A small supply chain disruption leads to worldwide shortages. Deep learning can't overcome the emergence condition because it assumes that the future somehow resembles the past, an assumption that collapses in emergent systems as they constantly adapt. If emergent systems evolve continuously, then an intelligent machine must do the same. The world doesn't only update every 6 months. It doesn't wait for us to gather more data or pause while we retrain our models. Yet this is exactly how our models currently operate. Discrete updates in a continuously changing world. Think about how strange this would be for us in practice. Imagine getting around a new city by memorizing last year's map and only being allowed to update your knowledge twice a year. You'd never get anywhere. You'd be stumped by new detours or try to go to shops that no longer exist. That wouldn't really make any sense. But that's how we treat our models. To navigate emergent environments, intelligence can't stand still. It has to operate autonomously, continuously aligning itself with the state of the environment in each moment, not relying on what used to be, but understanding how the present is changing. That is the missing piece in today's AI. But to address it, we need to address the field of prediction itself. You see, at the heart of this dilemma is our focus on next step prediction. We train our models to answer what will happen in this environment tomorrow. But in complex systems, tomorrow may not behave like any yesterday we've ever seen. The real question, the one our models are missing, is how is this environment changing now? Prediction fails sometimes not because we selected the wrong parameters, but because it is conceptually incomplete. The real world is not stationary. Small causes can produce big effects. Subtle interactions can trigger systemic shifts, and new structures can emerge without historical precedent. If we want machines that can navigate a non-stationary world, pattern-based prediction is part of our solution, but it isn't enough on our own. We also need technology that understands how an environment evolves over time. And that leads us to the crux of our research, the idea of causal intelligence. But what do I mean by causal intelligence? Well, take this. Imagine an intelligence that doesn't rely on historical memory at all, one that doesn't need retraining. Instead, imagine an intelligence that understands how change begins and evolves, studying the interaction within these complex systems. Technology that doesn't ask what comes next, but rather, where is the root cause of this change, and how is it evolving right now? This is causal intelligence. Causal intelligence models the underlying relationships between data points rather than memorizing patterns within them. It tracks the initiation of change, these early, subtle shifts, and follows how they propagate into larger transformations across a system. I want you to think of a raindrop hitting a pond. At the precise moment it touches the water, no ripples are visible yet, but the amount of water in the pond has already changed. Causal intelligence would detect that moment the state of the pond changed, and from that moment, it would follow the ripples as they propagate. Causal intelligence doesn't predict the future. It understands how the future is forming. This distinction between memorizing patterns and understanding relationships is something we learn as children. When I was younger, I could either memorize my times tables or understand multiplication, the underlying concept of x times y equals z, relating numbers together. Memorization worked for me until the teacher switched the times table. Understanding multiplication worked for every number. Deep learning behaves like the memorizer. Causal intelligence behaves like the learner who grasps the underlying structure. Both approaches have their own parts to play, but in complex systems, neglecting the latter can prove disastrous. Forecasts from our AI models are increasingly being tied to outcomes, influencing decisions that affect public policy, medicine, and judiciaries. When these models are blind to structural change, their errors become systemic. They not only mispredict, they mislead. And to build responsible intelligence, we need machines that understand how environments evolve, in addition to how they behaved. Deep learning gives us extraordinary pattern recognition, the ability to compress vast histories into usable structure. Causal intelligence gives us something different: real-time understanding of how change forms, propagates, and reshapes an environment. Neither replaces the other, neither diminishes the other. They solve different problems. One is pattern identification beyond our limits. The other is intelligence in motion. And when we combine the strengths of both approaches, we begin to approach a form of intelligence that is not only powerful, but resilient. An intelligence that can see both the structure of what has been and the formation of what is becoming. That is the future we should be aiming for. So in closing, if we want truly intelligent systems that remain dependable when environments shift, we cannot solely depend on deep learning. We must build causal intelligence that understands how change itself comes to be. Because only by pairing memory with motion can we build intelligence that remains robust when the future no longer resembles the past. Thank you so much.